Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest Sectigo webinar. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team here at Sectigo and want to extend our welcome to you. We've got an exciting session for you today. Tim Callan, our Chief Experience Officer, and Jason Sirocco, SVP of Product, will talk about how Certificate Lifecycle Management can help address the IT skills gap. As for every Sectigo webinar, we're recording this presentation and we'll share it with you afterwards. If you've got any questions during the presentation, we'd love to hear them. There is a chat function where you can add your questions and we'll try and answer as many as we can at the end. Tim and Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Leah, and good morning, Jason. Good to be here with you as always.
Yes, hello.
This is kind of a new one for us. You and I have been discussing this in a set of podcasts in our Root Causes podcast series, which we'll talk about a little more in case anybody on this webinar isn't familiar with it later. But we've been talking about how CLM fits into the very widely felt and understood world of IT skills gap, of not being able to have the IT skills we need to do all the things we want to do inside of our companies. And as such, I think we laid out some of those basic ideas on that webinar, but this is on those podcasts. But this is the first time that you and I are talking about this in the webinar format. So it's a little interesting to do it with slides, and the slides just sort of capture our thoughts, and I think we'll use them more than anything else as a guideline to walk through the opinions that you and I hold. Does that sound right?
Sounds right, Tim.
Yeah. Now, when we talked about it in the podcast, we really broke it into two main sections, and I think we want to do the same thing here today. The first one is for you as a leader, for you as a company and a manager inside your company, and there's a certain amount of resources you have. And again, there's this IT skills gap, and we'll talk about what we mean by that. How do you deal with CLM and that scarce resource? And then the second half of this podcast, or this webinar, excuse me, I'm getting my webinars and podcasts mixed up, is for you as an IT professional. What does CLM mean to you with the backdrop of this global IT skills gap? And I think those are the two things we want to cover today that really pair together and go in tandem. So
yeah, it is a different topic for us, Tim, but I think it's an important one. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Can't wait to get into this.
Yeah, I'm glad we're discussing it, as this comes up a lot. So the first thing, and I'm just going to start by contending this is true. I have been following this story, and there have been previous lives where I've actually done direct primary research on this story, and I am firmly convinced that for more than 20 years, global industry, enterprise around the globe, have suffered from a chronic IT skills gap. And what I mean about that is that the qualified IT professionals that are in the workforce are less than what businesses could justify in terms of making IT investments. And the consequence of that is that there is always, perpetually, always a gap between the two. There is always a non-trivial set of the enterprises in the world that cannot get the skilled IT professionals that they can justify to do work that they've justified that needs to be done. And that's just part of the way that we all live our lives. And I contend that it's so common that we have a whole generation of people who have spent their whole lives in that kind of workforce, and they just understand it to be normal.
No, agreed, Tim. This is exactly what I'm seeing as well. I'd be surprised if anybody is seeing something different.
Yeah, and so part of the reason that this occurs is that technology moves faster than people do, right? So there's been a few things connected to this. One of which is that the actual nature of the tech is changing. So even if you started, if you started your career even 10 years ago, the stuff you learned in school is not the same as the stuff that you're using today, right? You didn't go to school and really learn about DevOps and Kubernetes, and you probably didn't learn about zero trust. And and yet this stuff is all the stuff we're doing now. You didn't go to school and really learn about public cloud, right? And so much of what we're dealing with now just wasn't there. So we've got constant skills what do I want to say, revitalization or reinvention that has to occur for our people. But then at the same time, the other thing is the amount of digitization and the amount of tech-based business is going up dramatically. Like if you compare it today to, I don't want to pick a date, certainly I'd say 7 years ago. 7 years ago, there were still meaningful offline, non-digitized processes that were part of your total business process and your total customer experience. Now there just ain't, and so what that means is the amount of tech that is connecting all of our systems together has gone up. The total footprint of tech compared to the size of the business, the number of employees, the number of dollars, the number of customers, whatever other measure you want to use, that ratio is higher than it has ever been ever in the past. And what that does is that means that the demand for IT skills is even more. Right, Jay?
100%, Tim. The sheer amount of disparate technologies, the sheer amount of things that people have to know, the sheer amount of adjacent security that
Yeah.
is now part of IT, which is a completely different skill set that kind of gets bunged into people who aren't really trained for it. It's a scary scenario. I can't imagine how anybody in hardcore IT, it really in the center of that storm, is dealing with it, and that's from small size to large size organizations.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research to back this up. So, I saw I think it was some Gartner research that said that 75% of IT decision makers feel that their staff is, they're understaffed in IT. I saw some Forbes research that said that 93% of UK businesses say that their staff they're understaffed in IT, and it's easy to find this. Like that's just some quick stuff we found. If you just search around, you'll just find research after research after research. And as I said, I know from personal experience that was true a decade ago. That was true 2 decades ago. And then the other piece that's connected to this, part of why this happens, I think, is the stakes are higher than ever before, right? So we've talked about there being, this comprehensive kind of fabric of technology that's across everything we use. And one of the other consequences that comes out of that is cascading failures. And this is another thing you and I have talked about a lot on our podcast series, Jason, is that gone are the days of the isolated technical failure. This server goes down or the system goes down and nothing else happens, because they're all chains now. They're all work streams and they're all workflow chains. And so if an item in the flowchart fails, then everything downstream of it in the flowcharts fails. And these flowcharts are big and they're complex and they loop back on themselves. And in a long time frame, that means that everything goes down, right? And my case study in this that I like to bring out so much is the O2 outage of 2018. So in January of 2018, all of the people who had data plans on the O2 phone network and a few other ones around the world, including SoftBank, major one in Japan, all lost data on their cell phones for most of a day. And if you track it back to the root cause, it was a single unrenewed certificate in a single system in a third-party provider that wasn't even O2 or SoftBank or anybody else. And what happened is this one system failed, and that meant that things depended on it failed. And that meant that things depended on that failed. And the failure kept cascading downward. Boom, 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 until all of these networks were completely out, right? And it's like if it's all one big fabric, imagine it's all one big tent. And all these poles hold up the tent. And if you pull down one pole, the whole tent winds up collapsing because it's all connected. And that's what we see in the modern enterprise, right? That you have, if a certain system goes down, then you're not getting the data you need to do something else like service your customers because you're not getting that data. You're not able to move them through the process. And now that stalls there and they fail. And because of that, that means there's another problem and they fail. And this is our modern digital system. And this is what we live with and what we deal with. And again, what does that mean? It means not only do we need more IT professionals, but the hurt, the pain of not having those IT professionals is more than ever before. Right?
Agreed.
So what do we do? And again, I've got some stats on this. I can throw them out real quick. I've got these in front of me. World Economic Forum says that 50% of all employees are going to require reskilling by 2025. I don't know what your definition of reskilling is, but some kind of reskilling probably makes sense. 34% of business leaders find that the IT skills gap is reducing their ability to operate and launch services. So the services you can actually offer to your employees or to the customers or to the partners or et cetera are actually lacking. And again, Forbes says that 52% of businesses feel that skills adaptability, the ability to change the skills that you have, is essential to success. So again, easy to find research that backs this up. And this is 100% jives with my personal experience and with your personal experience, right, Jay?
Yeah, 100%, Tim. I tell you what, I'm going to make a real blunt statement, though. I think with all that being said, it won't be enough, and I don't think the targets will be achieved. That's just the harsh truth.
I agree with you. So with the table being set, what do we do about it? I'm going to click the slide, and why don't you tell us what we do about it, Jay?
Folks, if you haven't been in the security space and you're coming in from IT, you might not have seen a lot of what's been going on in security, where the skills gap is maybe at the absolute highest and has been for a very long time. It's all about automating. And now I know that a lot of folks in IT have, since the days that I was following IT very closely, these were back in the days when things were really quite manual, and people actually prided themselves on doing very manual processes.
Yeah.
So Tim, you talked about that certificate that was not automated, right? The certificate that needed a manual renewal that wasn't, and then caused a gigantic downtime. That was because of the lack of automation. I think IT now is embracing, through various kinds of IT, the mind share within it is moving towards automation. And it's really, we've seen things like robotic process automation, right? This has really helped, but it really, instead of an IT automation, this is really trying, people in other departments, people in the back office typically, who are trying to get rid of non-high value steps in their day and trying to get to the core of what is important in their job. IT actually needs to catch up to some of that, is I think the first bullet point, Tim.
Yeah, for sure. And you said a lot of things there to unpack, Jay, right? Like one of the things you pointed out is this belief that I can't trust the machine to get it right, so I have to do it myself. And that belief, which is probably a natural thing for people to have, has a couple of fallacies built into it. One of which is you're assuming that human accuracy is perfect, and it's not, right? People make errors, and if you can make a repeatable computer system where it does something that's easily defined and repeatable, you actually should expect, if you do your job right, to have a higher success rate than you do when you assign it to people. And so the quality fallacy is one of the fallacies that I think people fall into when they resist automation. And then another fallacy connected to that, that's connected to the quality fallacy, is just the fact that it doesn't matter. If I don't have the time to get through my task list, then even hypothetically, if I would do a higher quality job, if I'm not doing the job at all, then we need to find another solution, right? Especially some things aren't flexible, right? Like to bring it home to CLM, a good example of that is certificates, certificate renewal. Certificates expire, they expire when they expire. You can't call somebody up and add 30 days, right? And so they have to get swapped out, they have to get replaced. And if they don't, it's just plain systems are down. And when you're looking at that as your alternative, it forces you to think differently about this quality fallacy, right?
Oh, Tim, you've got it.
Yeah.
There's, uh, look, I've dealt with these kinds of personalities. I even was one for a while, where it is the there's so many reasons, and in fact, we've
Right.
talked about this on the other podcast a few times, Tim. It's funny how the word psychology now has come up a few times on our podcast. I'll introduce it now here in the webinar. There is a psychology, and it's not just job protection. It has to
Yeah.
do with a lot of I need things to be close to me, and not automated in order to be able to do my job. But the problem is
Yeah.
you end up being um, a bottleneck. And I can tell you right now, if you, as an IT practitioner, embrace automation in every way possible, trust me, your job's not on the line. You will be promoted. You will be looked at as being the savior of your piece of the world, and then moving onwards to bigger and better things at some point. I got to tell you that
Yeah.
there's nothing better than automation for anybody's resume right now, or in their accomplishments of what they can point to in their organization.
Yeah, you like to refer to this on the Root Causes podcast as this hug your server mentality, right? I want to
That's right.
hug the servers, right? And you know, it's a great instinct and it's an understandable instinct, but it's an instinct that can serve us poorly, right? And that's one of the things we need to be cognizant of. There's some irony in these bullets, right? If you think of some of the things we're talking about, right? Which is one of the ironies is that people who are overworked often don't make the time to take on the extra work to do an automation project because it's another project, right? So the fact that you're overworked means you don't make the time to do the work that will make you not be overworked. And that's a tough one. And that's a tough one. And you have my sympathy, and I'm sorry. And also, if we don't do it, we don't get out of the bind, right? We somehow, by hook or by crook, have to find a way to make the time to build the project, to follow through on the project, to get the budget, to buy the tools, to put the automation in place. And if we don't do that, we're going to continue to be overworked, we're going to continue to be error prone, and we're never going to get out of the cycle we're in. So that's irony number one. And irony number two is that putting automation in place itself is a skill. And when you have a skills gap, you may not have the skills and may not be able to get the skills to do the automation to solve the skills gap. And this is a bind that people find themselves in also. And companies and department heads and managers and individuals are constantly feeling this pain. And I hear this from people all the time.
Tim, I know folks, and I know this exists still to this day, who are literal ninjas at the command line.
Yeah.
But if you were asked them to code in an automation technology, even in a
Yeah.
low code technology, they will literally look at it like it's like, what is this? I don't code. Even in low code or no code environments, they stick to what they know best. They stick to that command line, and they literally would rather dig a ditch
Yeah.
rather than codify how to dig the ditch and let the computer do it for them.
And as we're providing training opportunities and career advancement opportunities for the people in our companies and our departments, we should be cognizant of this, right? Like one of the things is to give an open door to the people who are prepared to take it to expand their skill sets so that maybe this automation engineer is living latently inside your organization right now, and it's just somebody who needs a little bit of training, somebody who needs some classes. And maybe that person who already has the talent and the predilection can become your automation engineer. And maybe you're not going to go through a stack of resumes trying to hire somebody. And that's one of the things to be cognizant of. And then the other thing here, and I think we'll definitely return to this when we talk about your career as an IT professional, is there's a very real fact, you see this in the fourth bullet down, that oftentimes you are going to have people inside of your organization that don't want to do automation because they view doing their job as job security. And they think that as long as their particular job of putting the bolt into the hole doesn't get automated, they will always have a job doing that. And with those people, we need to accept that that's the very real reality of human psychology. And with those people, we need to, again, give them those growth paths, right? You say, no, there's a lot of things you can do. I will train you. I have better things in mind for you. I want you to do more and better. And I want you to help you do that, right? And I want to help you get there, and I want you to respond to me by helping me have a better organization, right? And that's really the response to that is to show them a path forward where they have a better career and they have a better future. And this again ties into how you think about it for yourself as an IT professional. But that's a really thing that we're going to face. And you're going to see that resistance, and that's one of the things that we have to overcome.
Absolutely.
So, we can educate our people. You referenced this already, Jay, right? We can provide some training and things, but that's only going to get us so far. And instead, we need to really, really ask ourselves, does this human have to do it at all? Is there something else that this amazingly involved and complex and nuanced human brain can do for me instead? And should I have the brain do that? And can I tell a computer, right? If I can have that brain tell a computer how to do this 1,000 times, then the brain can do that, and the computer does the hard work, and the brain goes and does something else. And this is really the way to think about it, right? And again, as our architectures and as our requirements continue to progress, the need for this just grows, right?
Tim, I would like to point to what's happening in the DevOps side of the world, where
Sure.
people are actively codifying entire processes of how to launch applications, especially those kinds of folks who are really used to dealing in cloud environments rather than old-fashioned on-prem hug your server environments. These folks have gotten used to, look, if I need to stand up an application and recover myself quickly, or build a test environment at a moment's notice and then bring it down, they're not doing those configurations manually. They are building automation tools to do that. They're learning the automation technologies. They're learning Ansible and Chef and Puppet and using those kinds of technologies to be able to literally codify the job.
Yeah, and you, it's interesting. You used DevOps. I think that's a great example. I was going to use AI, right?
Sure.
If we had been given this webinar a year ago, we wouldn't even say the word AI. But of course, right now, if you were looking at your watch thinking, how far are we in? And they haven't said AI yet, what a weird webinar, right? Because it's just everywhere. And we've all got technically skilled people who have to sit and try to understand, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? How does this work inside my environments? How do I use it to make tech products? How do I use it inside of tech products? How do I use it to make more efficiency or a better customer experience, or to productize it so it's actually part of the service I offer? These are this is the hard work. This is the work we want to be doing. And we need that flexibility of thought to do that. And to do that, we need to escape from, this color inside the lines or this repetitive mentality.
Yes, Tim. It's funny when I was thinking about the exact kind of personalities that stick to their command line and do work, one step at a time manually. You mentioned AI to those folks, and DevOps and automation scripting is already foreign and scary. Never mind AI, where the perception of the complete loss of control is
Yeah.
almost too scary even to imagine, other than writing your next resume, helping to get your next resume written using AI. It's very interesting, the psychology.
And this is a very old story, right? This was factory workers not wanting to be, replaced by robots. And this was, coal miners giving themselves black lung because they didn't want a robot to do that. And this was, and every step of the way you see this, right? You see this kind of worry that advances in technology are going to mean that we're not going to be able to be gainfully employed, but people keep being gainfully employed. And I think this is a better time than ever. I think for the person, and really we're going right into now your career as an IT professional, right? Is what we're seeing with all of this continuing rapidity of change is that this is your opportunity as an IT professional to continue career advancement. And career advancement does not come with being robotic and putting a peg in a hole, right? That's where the risk is not building those skill sets, not advancing, not moving forward, but instead being very stagnant to the point where you might wake up one day and realize that you can be replaced by an AI or a robotic process or a platform. And that's where CLM comes in. So if we take this home, we've been talking kind of generally, but let's talk about CLM and certificates very specifically, right? They're an example. They're such a perfect example of what we've been talking about, which is they're repeatable processes. They can be defined. There's clear success criteria. There's clear processes that can be made for a given process and environment and use case. And you can write a script or you can write code that will do this work, and then it will do it repetitively the same way every time. And as long as you get it right and accurate the first time, it will keep being right and accurate every time. You can put this on a timer. It doesn't sleep. It works even while you're on PTO. It works even if there's a government shutdown, right? It just works. And you can put that in and it can do the work. It can find the certs. It can swap out the certs. It can do all of that automatically. So when we think about certificates in particular, this is where this comes in. And so I just made this little chart here, right? On the left we say the trap. These are trapped ways of thinking, right? The first one, the trap is, I'm going to ensure my job security. What you really ensure is job stagnation. And what you really create is vulnerability, because you get out of step and you get behind the times and you miss your opportunity to advance your career, right? The second trap, we talked about this, short-term project avoidance. Oh, I can't take the project on today. I'm too busy. I'm too busy renewing all these certs. I don't have time to implement an automation platform. And the problem with that is you never get out of it. You never escape. You never dig your way out of the hole. And the hole just gets bigger because the number of certs you have goes up, not down. And the hole just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the third one, what you talked, the hands on the levers attitude, the don't trust the machine, the hug your server attitude. I can't trust the machine. Humans make errors. And for a repeatable, programmable, discrete, definable robotic process, humans make more errors than computers do. And so you're not increasing your accuracy rate, you're decreasing your accuracy rate. right?
Agreed, Tim. Human error is a major part of this. You gave one example earlier in this webinar. There are hundreds and maybe thousands of those examples. And in the real world of IT overall, it unfortunately is a cost and a risk that I think CIOs and CISOs are not taking full measurement of in their organization.
Yeah. So, we may have talked about a lot of these things, but if you think so, and then so let's talk about your life, right? So up until now, we were kind of talking about I have a certain amount of resources. I'm a CIO or I'm a senior executive, and I have staff, and the staff do these things. And why would I want to do a certificate automation solution, a CLM? Right? Certificate Lifecycle Management platform. And it's a better way to use my staff. It's a way to dig myself out of my hole. It's a way to keep the company current and to foster an environment of innovation and all the things we've already said. Now, let's say you're the person who's responsible for monitoring and renewing the certs. Why do you want to do this? Well, first of all, I talk to a lot of people in this role, and I don't think this is any way to live your life. I've spoken to people who say, every morning I get up and the first thing I do is look at email to find out what broke in the night. And if nothing broke in the night, then I breathe a sigh of relief and I go make my coffee, right? And I go, is that really how you want to live your life? Like, is that the quality of life you want to have between now and when you retire? Or would you like to have a certain degree of security that you're going to get up in the morning and you're not going to learn that something broke in the night? And a platform that's monitoring these certificates, every certificate expires, right, Jason? By definition, that's the definition of a certificate. They all expire. And as a consequence, every certificate is a little ticking time bomb that's out there in your environment waiting to blow you up. And what you really need is a computerized friend who knows where they are, who sees them, who monitors them, and who replaces them before they blow you up.
Tim, I would say, first of all, you want that certificate to have a lifespan. That's a security best practice. I would say from now on, folks, if you take away one thing from this webinar, please never think about utilizing a digital certificate for whatever reason without having its lifespan managed. In other words, automating its renewal at the very least.
Yeah. It's, and we've got some estimates on time to manage, right? And you talk about that, Jay.
Yeah, so let's talk about what the time it takes every time you do a renewal. And I tell you, that command line ninja I was talking about earlier, they just love manually doing this kind of process because there's a few things to do. You have to interact with the certificate authority. You have to get the certificate. You have to put it in the right spot. Then you have to change the configurations of your web server. And then there's some other work to do. And first of all, you had to know that what the timing of what this was. Maybe you looked at a spreadsheet. Maybe there's some other things to do. And Tim, all of that can take a lot of time. And I can tell you, it's not an easy process to manually install a certificate.
Sure. Yeah. And even when you get it down, like it's still it takes that time and it's still error prone, right? And we estimate 1 to 2 hours for your typical, certificate installation in a typical environment. And that's a lot of time. So how would it be if we could make some time to automate that, right? So the first point and kind of the point of this first slide is that you yourself can be more efficient at your job. You can have less opportunity for error. You don't get up in the morning and have this what broke in the night problem. And you can get your job more easily if you become a champion of automation. Now, depending if you're the person who's administrating those certs, you may not have budget control. You may not be the person who gets to say, look, we're going to buy a CLM, but you're definitely a recommender. And you're definitely the person who does have budget control. And you definitely can be responsible for saying, hey, I believe that this is a better way for us to do things. And here are some options. Let's talk about Acme. Let's talk about a CLM platform. And you can do that. And that is absolutely within your power, even if you're not the end decision maker, even if what you're doing is you're making a business case or you're advancing something. And that can make you better at your job on the day-to-day. And it also is how you future-proof your career, right? So this is what we talked about before. If you don't want to be left behind, how about instead of being a trained sysadmin, you become a trained automation engineer? Or in addition to being a trained sysadmin, you become a trained automation engineer. And that's one of the options that's available here, right? You extend that skill set, you make your career more exciting, you make yourself more marketable, you give yourselves more career opportunities. And again, I think, we all have our own opinions, but I know a lot of people who actually get more satisfaction out of building an automated solution that does something successfully over and over again than they do out of doing that thing themselves. And if you're in that group, this is your chance to do that. And it's sitting in front of you and you can grab it, right? One of the benefits of this being such a new space, Acme is so new and CLM as a category is so new. Some of the things we do have been sitting around for decades and decades. And this stuff hasn't. There's still a lot of people who don't understand it and don't know what it is. And one of the benefits of that is those of us who do understand, who get there a little on the early side and know what this is about, have a chance to take a leadership position with it. And if you take that leadership position, it could yield benefits. And if you don't, when's the next time you're going to get that chance? Right?
Tim, you might ask, some people might be asking the question, why now? And I'll give an answer. In publicly trusted certificates, we've heard the call now for certificates that will be less than a year in lifespan, 90 days to perhaps 10 days. And therefore, manual renewal of digital certificates, it's not even really tenable. And so therefore, please embrace automation. It's the time. And I will also tell you, Tim, in privately trusted certificates for use cases such as authentication and all the other good things you might use a certificate for, we're talking about certificates now in DevOps lasting hours, minutes, seconds. And in the case of certain kinds of authentication, we're talking about truly automated ephemeral certificates. It's an exciting area now to be working in because these things have to work. And if you're part of that team that can make these things just work by automating using certificate lifecycle management, believe me, your skill set's valuable.
Yeah, and if you think about this last bullet here, I think this is a good point for us to make also, which is if you're the person who understands how this really happens, because you were the person who does it, you're a key stakeholder in that automation process, right? And if you raise your hand and you want to drive that automation process, it may be that you're the incumbent, right? And so this, for a lot of us, this will represent an opportunity. If we'd like to expand our skill set, if we'd like to do something different, if we'd like to do something that is more leveraged and, puts us on a career path that is closer to the one we ultimately want to be on, this may be your open door and may be your chance to walk through it. And so, hey, I'm the resident expert. I know this better than anybody. I would like to be the project leader. That can be a compelling case. In a lot of organizations, the answer to that will be great. Yes, please do. So, I think we've probably hit what you see on this page really, but, this is a chance to progress in your career. You know, this first point is worth thinking about. So CLM, Jason and I have this model. It's not in this deck, but have this model, which is the 5 pillars of certificate lifecycle management. And let's rattle off the 5 pillars, Jason, shall we?
Sure, Tim. You have deployment.
Sure.
You
Deployment.
have also renewal,
Yep.
right? And you also have revocation
Yep.
and
Discovery.
And we do have a 5th now, which is all
Yeah.
about integrations. And then
Integrations. Yep.
there is an overarching something that touches all the pillars ultimately, which is visibility. In other words, you cannot manage what you don't know you have.
Yeah.
And
So,
several of those pillars involve automation, like renewal, deployment, right? These things all, various pillars have automation within them. And I think on this slide, Tim, you're talking about one of the main pillars here being discovery, and it's such an important one.
Yeah. And part of what I'm thinking about here is, to some degree, this gives you an opportunity to chunk up your learning, right? You can say, look, I'm going to focus on certificate discovery, because if we know what our certificates are, then we're not going to have outages because we didn't know the certificate exists. And I'm going to solve that. I'm going to get that under my belt. And then maybe when that's done, this is a time to talk about automated deployment. And then we're going to look into Acme. We're going to say, how are we going to use Acme to deploy our certs automatically rather than doing individual installation? And then when you got that project feeling good, then you say, okay, now I'm going to think about automating renewal. Now I've discovered my certs. I know that they exist. I have a way to deploy them automatically through Acme. Now I'm going to do automated renewal. And then when you got that in a headlock, then you turn around and you say, well, how am I going to deal with revoke and replace, right? And this is a way you can think about it. So the nice thing about the 5 pillars conceptualization of the space is it makes what otherwise might seem like a giant, intractable subject, right? A boil the ocean kind of problem, and it puts it into discrete bits that you can take on and solve. So you can say, look, we're going to automate our deployment. This is what we're going to do. It's incredibly important. Now that that's done, we're going to look into how we do that in a renewal basis, right? And so that's the kind of way you can think about it. And it's a great way to eventually get the whole thing under control in the organization and to expand your skill set and your responsibilities, perhaps ultimately until it's the whole certificate management package.
Yes, agreed, Tim.
So that's what we have prepared. What did we miss here, Jay? Again, this is our first outing on this one. So I want to make sure we discussed everything we want to discuss.
For sure. For everybody who's listening in, been listening to what we've been saying, I think the story arc is, in very simple terms, is worth repeating. Automation is becoming the way to solve a lot of problems. We're talking about the IT skills gap. This is the main crux of the webinar. But I think you could lay out a laundry list of problems you have in your environment. And a lot of those things, if you had automation skills, rather than just the traditional skills, you probably will be solving more of your problems than not. And Tim really pointed out some of the things, the traditional thinkings and the bugbears in people's heads that stop you from solving those problems with automation. Then we've, of course, went right specifically into a very special use case, certificate lifecycle management automation. And you brought up the point of, goodness, the cost of actually doing that, the cost of doing it poorly, the cost of doing it manually has cost in just, it's inefficient in just the amount of work. It's also extremely risky. So
yeah, the risk is the biggest cost, I would say. Like, a lot of people talk about the efficiency. They go, look, this is a more efficient way to spend your resources. And it is, and that's right. But honestly, the risk is the biggest cost, right?
So what
is the cost of an outage? What is the cost of a day of downtime? What is the cost of a lost customer?
So then compare that. If you're on the business end of IT and not just the tech head, consider what is the cost of certificate lifecycle management And the highly productized tool sets that are available today in certificate lifecycle management to bring your staff up to speed, giving them uh, something that would be a delight to learn, because it's great for their CV. It's a great skill set to have to help them to think about automation in the rest of your workspace. And I got to tell you, when Tim talks about the risk, and you compare the costs of certificate lifecycle management and tooling up, my goodness, Tim, it ends up being, and I hate to say it, it's the cheapest insurance in history.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The only other thing I want to add is you alluded to something briefly, but let's just make sure everybody on the webinar is aware of it because it's an extremely important point, is the shortening certificate lifecycle landscape. And this has been going on for a number of years. The amount of times you can use a cert have gone down and down and down. The best and obvious example of that, of course, would be SSL certs, which went from unlimited to 3 years to 2 years to now 1 year, and it's already a roadmap item to go down to 90 days. We've seen reductions in the duration of an SMIME certificate, which now have been limited to 3 years and are soon to be limited to 2. We may see we across the board, all of the certificates we use are getting shorter. And that means that the amount of overhead that is required just continues to go up. And so that's also an important part of this landscape. Not only do we have more certs, not only do we have higher stakes, not only is there more interconnectivity and everything is going to go down, but the frequency at which we need to deal with them also goes up. And so combine that with what you said, and that's the why now. When you go to your question, Jay, why now? That's the why now.
It is the biggest stimulation for folks. You're going to have to automate certificates now, not just public, but private, as public and private. Folks, it is going to absolutely have to. The threshold of the days when doing it manually, those days are about to end. So let's tool up.
And this is great news because you can get more efficient and you can have a higher accuracy rate and quality can go up, and you can career path your people and you can career path yourself. So this is freaking awesome, right? And that's the thing to think about, right? This is actually not a doom and gloom message. This is a message of optimism. This is great news for everybody who has to deal with these things. It's getting better. It's getting better. Let's take advantage of that. All right. So Jason and I, as we've mentioned, Jason and I have a podcast called Root Causes. We've been doing it for about 4 or 5 years, 4 years. We've published more than 350 episodes. We publish new episodes every week. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Root Causes Podcast, and it'll be right up there at the top of your results. And we would love to have you come join us. Come subscribe, come listen on your favorite service. We talk about all kinds of topics like this. We talk about PKI, digital identity, certificates, related subjects. Sometimes we take a different angle on it, like how CLM enters into the IT skills gap. As I mentioned, this was a conversation that was originally evolved on that podcast. And we touch a broad range of subjects in this area. So we'd love to have you come join us. And with that, I think maybe we're ready for questions.
Great, thank you both. Yes, let's start with one question that has been asked twice, actually.
Okay.
Can you give details of what your solution does to help with the need for automation?
Jay, you want to take it away?
Yeah, certainly, Tim. I'm glad the question was asked. I can tell you, most importantly, you think about those pillars of certificate lifecycle management that we just talked to. So deployment and renewal, which are very important in terms of automation. There are provisioning technologies that are supplied as part of this. And so that is a big part of it. The ability to revoke certificates, the ability to actually be able to replace a certificate if necessary. The ability to integrate into your IT workflows is an important part of the offering. And overall, the ability to see exactly which kinds of certificates have been issued and have visibility to those things, and then also to discover certificates that might have been installed in a, let's call it a rogue certificate way, by shadow IT. Your colleagues down the hallway that work on other projects might have installed a publicly trusted certificate on a domain that you're aware of, but you might not be aware of the certificate. The ability to then discover that is also an important part of the technology. So really, if you follow those 5 pillars, and the 6th pillar also being visibility, I would say that you're going to have a really good understanding of what certificate lifecycle management offerings are to bring you. It really just brings to that core everything we're talking about in terms of automating certificate lifespans.
Right, thank you. Another question that's come in is, for people starting out in an IT career, do you have any recommendations on which skill sets to focus on?
Well,
yeah, Tim, I got to tell you, it's such a wide ranging. If you're coming in from security, then I got to tell you that any kind of automation technology, in other words, there are automation platforms in security today that if you were to learn them, those skills are highly transferable. I would say
yeah,
in more pure IT, any kind of the SOAR, orchestration, remediation, automation tools that are out there, those are important. And I would say that there's almost going to be no IT department that isn't involving certificates in some way, and therefore learning about certificate lifecycle management, learning about technology such as Acme, those are all going to be helpful things.
yeah.
Great. Then came a question on who is deciding that the life expectancy of certificates should be 90 days now. Is this a recommendation from CAs or best practices in the industry?
So the thing that Jason and I were referencing in particular is that there has been very clear messaging from major browsers that it is only a matter of time before they are going to require that the maximum term for a public SSL certificate will be 90 days. Now, we don't have a specific timeline on that. In other webinars and in our podcast, I have forecast that that's going to occur sometime in 2025. But it is definitely coming. It's not an if, it's only a when. And there are great reasons for that. It has to do with the fact that shorter lived certificates are more secure. It has to do with the fact that there is therefore less of a gap between domain ownership and certificate ownership. It has to do with the fact that we need crypto agility because our cryptography needs to change. It has to do with the fact that quantum computers are going to make us replace RSA and ECC with a new set of algorithms, and that we're going to have to deal with that. These are all things, by the way, that we cover on our podcast and we cover in other webinars. And you can deep dive on all of this if you want, because there's a lot to discuss here. But all of those drivers together mean that this is definitely going to come. So what we were referencing specifically is a series of rules that come from the CA browser forum that are driven by the browsers that ultimately force these to go down. Now, is this a best practice? Yeah, there's that too. So in your private CA, where you get to make your own rules, you definitely need to consider shorter certificate lifespans. And there are certain environments, like Jason said, depending on the use case, you may have no choice. You may have to. In a DevOps environment, you pretty much have to. If you want to use certain DV-only solutions like Let's Encrypt, they're limited to 90 days. They won't go more. And so this is part of the real environment, and it's just becoming more and more prevalent. And somewhere along the line for public certs, it's going to be a hard requirement that none of us can get an exception to.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what is an ephemeral certificate?
An ephemeral certificate. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, an ephemeral certificate is one that only lasts as long as it is needed by the task that is calling it. And I would say that the most common use case for that is some form of authentication, which is the authentication handshake between user and a server, just the most generic example. That certificate might only live as long as the handshake of the authentication, and then the certificate basically is no longer, it's essentially gone.
And Jay, that's accomplished, right, just by setting a very short lifespan. So the certificate expires in, I'm going to make this up, 1 minute. And then we know that the handshake takes less than a second, and we know there's no chance of it being too long, and then the certificate just expires. Is that the basic idea?
That's the basic idea. There's no super hard and fast rule. We have actually had podcasts on this topic, talking to DevOps specialists who have really thought this through. And I think that for anybody who's embarking on that world, you need to really think about where you put your certificate lifespans. But we are talking about extremely short-lived certificates at this point.
Yeah.
Right, and then we have got one last question. Does Sectigo offer any certificate management automation tools? I think you've alluded to it, but maybe to make it very clear.
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes, and we cover all of those 5 pillars of CLM, including the 6th of visibility. Absolutely, everything that we have talked about on this webinar, there is tooling available from Sectigo.
Great, cool. I think we've covered all the questions. So I think we can probably wrap it up. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for your time. If you've got any more questions, do get in touch with the Sectigo team. We've got other exciting webinars coming up, so keep an eye on our website to see upcoming topics, and we'd love to see you again soon. But for now, thank you for watching.